Think of Spurs before the Premier League and you'll instantly be drawn to Bill Nicholson, but peel that back and there's so much more to the club. It's Hoddle, it's Villa's goal at Wembley, it's winning in Europe again. These are the underrated Keith Burkinshaw years. Bill Nicholson had long been burned out, his decision making long since erratic as the manager of the White Hart Lane club. He'd bought players like Alfie Conn that never fit his mould, and when he wasn't doing that, he wasn't buying players at all. For his successor in the 1974-75 season, merely the promotions of Ray Evans and Chris McGrath to the first team had to do. A 4-0 defeat against Middlesbrough on home soil in the League Cup ended the great era. The club had asked him to stay on for 2 weeks, so the Blanchflower with an up-to-date coaching model that saw Johnny Giles interviewed to become player coach. In the end, Spurs spaffed all those ideas up a wall when they hired a former Arsenal player in Terry Neill. Nicholson would not be given a post-managerial role. For now. Neill was asked, aged 32, to take on an empire of a football club, and his first soundbite could have gone better when he said, "I am as surprised as you are to find myself at Tottenham." The former gunner brought in John Duncan up front. Meanwhile, far too much onus was placed on the youth of Neil McNabb, Mike Dillon and Keith Osgood. It was a dreadful campaign that saw Spurs occupying the drop zone as late as April. However, the revival had already begun with a Steve Perryman endorsed 3-0 win at home to Wolves on March the 28th. QPR and Luton were downed either side of April Fool's Day ahead of a crucial relegation 4-pointer with Chelsea at the Lane on April 19th. A win and Spurs will be out of the drop zone ahead of a trip to Highbury. Naturally, Arsenal dispatched the Lily Whites, which left a tense final day at home to Leeds. The permutations were simple, thanks to both Luton and Chelsea finishing up their seasons beforehand. A point would be enough for survival. Leeds in 9th had bigger fish to fry, like the European Cup final, so it was D-Day at the Lane. A win on the pitch, but by no means a victory or triumph. Spurs were breaking up fast. Martin Peters had his run-ins with a new manager and was quickly dispatched to Norwich. Joe Kinnear would soon join him. Phil Beale had departed for Brighton, and Terry Neill even employed a clairvoyant. There was one sliver of light though in the summer of 1975. Glenn Hoddle had graduated to the first team. That and a first half of the season run to the final four of the League Cup in time for the new year. A new year that also pitted Spurs against handicap team Stoke City in the third round of the FA Cup, who took them to a replay. As we entered 1976, it was destined to be another case of Spurs looking over their shoulder as they sat in 16th. So they reached for an old familiar, lean back and rely on the cup competitions.
Gareth races onto a ball, rounds Pat Jennings and side-foots it into the net. Glenn Keely jumps high and heads Newcastle into the lead for the first time on aggregate, so he slots the ball through superbly to Noti, who's plenty of time.
Duncan has got round. Perryman now. Blinding goal by Steve Perryman. Up towards the near post. And Jennings had lost it, turned in by Moores. So often the onus on him. And on him with a vengeance now. Salmons to take. And Stoke.
In the space of 3 days, Spurs were stripped of their purpose for the 1975-76 campaign, and it was only in mid-March and 5 league wins on the spin that they pulled clear of the drop zone. Despite the 9th place in the league, the writing had long been on the wall for Terry Neill. Bertie Mee's resignation at Arsenal simply gave him a push back to where his true calling was in North London. But let's rewind back to the summer of 1975. I said there was one sliver of light for Spurs, but it wasn't Hoddle I was on about, it was Keith Burkinshaw. The hiring of the Barnsley-born coach was single-handedly the best thing Terry Neal ever did for Spurs. Either way, Burkinshaw was promoted as coach, a massive relief after upping his entire life from the north and bringing it down to London just 12 months prior. Thankfully, the hierarchy had seen through the dynamic that he and Neal had had. Burkinshaw the workhorse, Neal the public figure. The new manager, however, was starting from the bottom. Cyril Knowles had retired, Martin Chivers, Jimmy Neighbour, Alfie Conn and Ralph Coates had either left that summer or were due their departure. The start to the season was disastrous, gaining a point from 3 games, which was thankfully rectified by wins at Old Trafford and at home to Leeds United. Rectified, but not for long, as Spurs embarked on an all-time horrific run. They bombed out of the League Cup to Wrexham at home, got slapped for 8, yes 8, away to Derby and won just 2 more league games in the remainder of 1976. As they sat mired in the relegation zone as fireworks crackled all over London, they looked around to their new relegation rivals. Bristol City, West Ham and Sunderland, 3 clubs they had lost to in 3 successive matches in November. Burkinshaw knew he had a tough task, but probably didn't realise it was going to be this bad. Then they were drawn a trip to South Wales in the 3rd round of the FA Cup.
Good ball, and a good chance, and a great goal! Peter Sayer, number 10, the scorer.
Normally the season would be over for Spurs now, but league form wasn't picking up anytime soon. Just look at February 1977, 4 matches, 4 defeats, bottom of the pile, 16 games to save their season, and 1 point away from safety. Spurs' season was only just getting started.
Hoddle, here's Jones. Oh yes! Oh, what about that?
And that triumph over Aston Villa just about kept Spurs in the game. Sure, they were only goal difference away from safety with 2 games to go, but they were also the only team to have played 40 matches. Next was a trip to Main Road, and Manchester City could hardly have been worst opponents. They were hungry for a league title they hadn't won in 9 years and were within touching distance of league leaders Liverpool.
It's towards Booth's head. 1-0. Barnes. To fall for Stewart. Knocked on by Owen, chased by Barnes. Now can he finish this one? Oh yes! Oh, what a beauty! And Hotspur! 4-0. He's got Giller marked inside him and Osgood in 2 minds. King, 5-0.
Still, Spurs clung on in there, 2 points and a disadvantaged goal difference ahead of their final match against Leicester City. Only now they were bottom and still everybody had games in hand on them. Spurs needed a win and a list of favours as long as your arm. They got the win 2-0 against the Foxes, a team they once shared an FA Cup final pitch with 16 years ago in the double winning campaign. They didn't get one favour. West Ham got a point at Anfield, which coincidentally was enough for the Reds to win the league. Then QPR went to Elland Road and won, while Sunderland got a point at Norwich. Tottenham Hotspur's 27-year association with the First Division was over. Pat Jennings left a gaping hole in goal as he left Spurs for Arsenal that summer. One man who wasn't leaving, Keith Burkinshaw, who was backed by the hierarchy to take the club back into the First Division. Now that the worst had already happened, what next?
High towards Colin Lee, won it well in the air.
Oh, the 9-0 over Bristol Rovers, slapping teams like Oldham Athletic, Sheffield United, Blackburn Rovers and Luton Town. Season, they entertained Hull on the outside, looking in to the 3 promotion places. Brighton waiting for just one to slip up. Bolton were already promoted, Brighton host Thrills 0-0 draw and were proven right. Both went up, Brighton were left to seethe, and Spurs were back into the big time and out of the doldrums.
And it's going in. But he was always in a position there when the shot. Back for Ardile. And a goal surely for Colin Lee. Back now to Platt. Oh, that counts.
And if anything, it did the club the world of good. Glenn Hoddle had got some vital experience and was already becoming the man at Spurs. Bill Nicholson had been brought back as a scout by Burkinshaw, and the club were about to make an enormous splash upon their return to the First Division. Not on the pitch, 11th for nowhere in the Cups wasn't setting anybody's world ablaze. Nope. Through the £750,000 splurge on two geniuses from Argentina, Osvaldo Ardiles and Ricardo Villa. Just like that, the club was changed. Naturally, the headlines drifted towards the Argentines, the manager and the homegrown star boy, Glenn Hoddle. Under the surface, Bill Nicholson was still making the club tick, acquiring talent whilst players like Chris Hughton, Mickey Hazard, Tony Galvin trickled through the door at the behest of youth coach Peter Shreve.
Centre-half Paul Miller, his first league goal, and what a good run it was there, bowling in Ricky Villa's corner.
The second season back was another of stability, closer to the European spots than of relegation in the league, and a half-hearted attempt in the FA Cup, only now it seemed like there was an organisation and a belief about the club. In the summer of 1980, Spurs went as big in the transfer market as they had ever gone, to price Steve Archibald from Aberdeen for over £1 million and pairing him off with Stoke's Gareth Crooks, valued at over half that. From the very first match against the reigning European champions, they both showed their worth instantly.
His first as a season. Crooks is away! Oh, that's beautiful! Oh, that's brilliant!
Then a win over the self-proclaimed team of the 80s, Crystal Palace, followed, and whilst Arsenal were eliminated in a decent League Cup run and beaten again in league competition in the new year, it was quickly apparent in the early weeks of 1981 that this season was boiling down to one thing again.
This was met by Crooks. The 1-2 with Crooks, and top-class finishing that puts his side 2-0 ahead. For the season so far, laid on the goal for Glenn Hoddle and gives Spurs a fourth-round tie against Hull.
Put the home side ahead with only 7 minutes remaining. Yes, the scorer was Steve Archibald. Spurs 2, Hull 0.
Oh, Ardiles has got a great chance. And he scored! Hoddle's flick. Lacey. Archibald! Hughton is well forward, it's Chris Hughton, it's there!
And here's Hoddle on the edge of the penalty area, floated to the far side there. It's going to be Hoddle with the kick, floated straight at Bonds!
And it's there by Miller!
Left at the moment, with Perryman, here comes Crooks.
It's Crooks! It's there!
Front through here,
Oh, he's outpaced them! Crooks is there! Oh, yes! Number 2 for Crooks! Villa shot! Oh! 3-0! And Ricky Villa produces another marvellous moment for Spurs!
10th in the league as Crooks and Villa combined for the goals in Highbury's semi-final. All eyes were pointed to Wembley on May the 9th for Spurs' first proper visit to Wembley since the League Cup final of 1973.
Mike with an early ball, played in there.
And a goal by Hutchison!
Beating a wall. And this probably is the first real opportunity he's had. He's about 20 yards out, he's well to the right of goal.
Hoddle turning it, but no goal by Hutchison! It is Archibald who's got a chance! Good save, Ricky Villa! Ranson with the kick. Miller, Reeves underneath it. And now Hutchison to McKenzie! Oh, tremendous goal! And here comes Reeves, and it's there! What a chance here for Archibald! Crooks! Villa. And still Ricky Villa! What a fantastic run! He scored! Amazing goal!
Spurs were officially back as a force in English football. Silverware had been won. They were busy whipping Ajax on their return to European competition, and Pat Jennings had finally been replaced as Ray Clements entered through the doors.
Constabulary there. And he made room for Hazard.
Seemingly nothing could stop Spurs now. They'd returned to Wembley, albeit in defeat to Liverpool when contesting the League Cup final. However, they were one of the Reds' challengers for the title. Even if they were an outside shot, they were still on the fringes of the conversation even in the spring, especially now with 3 points for a win up for grabs. They were busy preparing for another FA Cup semi-final when clashing omens saw a comfortable looking clash against Leicester be played at an unlucky venue in Villa Park. The draw had opened up to the other contenders with West Brom and QPR. Surely Spurs' name was on the trophy, on multiple trophies potentially. There was Barcelona to come to the lane in the week for a semi-final of a Cup Winners' Cup clash. Everything was rosy in the Spurs garden. Until...
It would appear the sun has set on yet another corner of the British Empire. This one far down in the South Atlantic. Argentina today invaded and seized the Falkland Islands, which have been under British rule for nearly 150 years.
Which sounds completely unrelated, doesn't it? But let me remind you that Spurs had two top Argentine footballers under their employ. With society already at fever pitch under the rule of Margaret Thatcher, a war chucked onto the smouldering embers of the country had potential to needlessly torch the good work being done innocently at White Hart Lane. The news of conflict in the Falklands reached British shores on the morning of the club's semi-final against Leicester. Burkinshaw now had something huge in his in tray that morning, and he decided to start both Villa and Ardiles.
Played for Ardiles. Coming into Crooks! Brilliantly executed well. Crossed in once more towards Hazard and Crooks. And it's an own goal by Wilson!
It had already been pre-arranged that Ardiles would reconvene with his national team after the match, in advance of their preparations for the 1982 World Cup in Spain. It left Burkinshaw with one fewer decision to make, but in light of death threats aimed at Villa, he was pulled from the team that made the cup final against QPR. By then it was Spurs' only chance at silverware in '82. Barcelona had edged them out of a semi-final in Europe, and one too many slip-ups either side of that in the league against Sunderland, Manchester United and Birmingham City had Spurs out of the championship running by May. There would be no chance of a Ricky Villa masterclass in this final, but it was a tie that went the full distance regardless.
Hoddle! It's there! It's there! He won it with the tackle and he scored the goal! Roberts, it was Hazel split and Bennett was in there and it's a goal! Terry Fenn. What happens here? Tony Curry comes in with the tackle, down he goes, penalty, Hoddle to take. Scores! Never has a penalty been missed in an FA Cup final at Wembley.
After such a wonderful Munich in the earlier rounds of the Cup Winners' Cup, Spurs' season effectively ended in the first few weeks of 1983. Burnley surprisingly turfed them out of the League Cup quarter-final before Spurs' invincibility in the FA Cup ended with a fifth-round trip to Goodison exact 23 points off Liverpool's unimpeachable pace at the top of the league, and this time they had no comfort of games in hand. What they quickly did find was Alan Brazil from Ipswich Town. He made his debut at Vicarage Road on Wishing in the bottom half. Although not much use outside of this season, Alan Brazil re-injected a bit of life into White Hart Lane.
Carried on his run as well, and he's in here, Chris Hughton with a chance, and a goal! In numbers, Falco! Pick that one out! Chris Hughton is to go for goal, it's 3! With the free kick, decides to come in, does he get there? And Falco gets another! As Brazil is in here, is this to be his moment to get on the score sheet to make it 5?
Peppering over the cracks to finish 4th, combined with nothing from cup competitions, the subsequent 1983-84 campaign had no right to be as fondly remembered as it would become. Sure, Steve Archibald struck up a run of form that had Barcelona swimming around like starving piranhas, but they were losing their Argentine magic. They wouldn't string together 2 league wins until October, and they bounced out of domestic cups early, to Arsenal in the League Cup and to Norwich in the FA Cup. However, what you're seeing right now was the beginning of something special, i.e. the reason Spurs fans look back on 1984 all misty-eyed with gooey hearts. Once the 14-0 aggregate triumph over Irish opposition was achieved, the competition suddenly got pretty spicy.
Of form, Steve Archibald, and he was on hand there.
Will take this kick. Roberts on the far post, almost left. Nearly got it, the header. Archibald! He's got it!
Perryman to take. Roberts won it. Hazard, nice control, and Archibald. And Hazard goes for goal. Oh yes! Spurs in front.
From Hoddle outclassing Cruyff in Rotterdam and Steve Archibald sinking Bayern to Ardiles and Brazil's final flurries in a tempestuous Austria Wien and Mark Falco's away goal in Split, Spurs had reached the final. Across two legs they would meet Anderlecht. This wasn't the game's gone modern day 2020s Anderlecht with no chance of winning. This was an Anderlecht who were reigning UEFA Cup champions, who had 2 Cup Winners' Cups under their belt from the 70s and were the toughest proposition yet.
Dangerous, making the extra man. And they scored! Chiniatinski! Oh, he got return there for Ardiles. And he's hit the crossbar. Roberts! He's done it! 1-1! He beat Parks. Saved it! Scored! He's now. And he has it! Whether Parks can save. No! Is the man taking it? And he saved it! Spurs have won it!
Of the night, Ozzy Ardiles said, "We won the UEFA Cup, but this team was finishing its life." That all but confirmed when Keith Burkinshaw resigned shortly afterwards. The club had already changed the moment they decided to renovate the West Stand at a cost of £3 million. In footing such an enormous bill, close to a year's turnover, the club found themselves leasing out executive boxes in the new stand, which drew the attention to local boy got rich Irving Scholar, a Spurs supporter. Long and dull story short, Scholar wanted to lease out a box, ended up in the thick of a spat between Chairman Sidney Wale and Arthur Richardson, and reached the point in 1983 where he got control of the club and was able to float it on the stock exchange. This was a new Spurs, a more commercial Spurs, with a harsh dividing line of the UEFA Cup win over Anderlecht achieved in the summer of '84, a fairly new ownership structure and a team on the pitch that was brand new. Burkinshaw was never going to be able to live up to the Bill Nicholson time at the club, but he got pretty close. He was able to retain the FA Cup just like he did, something that no club had done in the 20-year period between. He was able to win on the continent like he did. But Burkinshaw was unable to win the league. Then again, he was handed a distinctly different set of circumstances. Whilst Bill Nicholson was handed opponents like an over-the-hill Wolves team governed by Stan Cullis and flash-in-the-pans Burnley and Ipswich, Spurs now had the challenge of wresting control away from an almighty Liverpool governed by the boot room in the 1970s and 80s. Well, to learn all about those Bill Nicholson times, we've got 2 videos for you here.